If you've hit the slopes at a destination ski resort before, chances are you've felt like they've taken multiple days or even over a week to cover. But the idea of a big mountain enters into a completely different realm when you visit Les Trois-Vallées, France, which not only offers over 600 kilometers of marked ski trails, but spans over 25,000 continuous acres from edge to edge. If you ski or ride at a typical cadence, the ski region is so big that it would probably take about 40 continuous hours to do each marked trail once, and probably over 100 hours to properly cover all the off-piste. So what's it actually like to plan a vacation to a destination this big? And are there any reasons you shouldn't go? Let's take a look. The first thing to note about Les Trois-Vallées is its layout. The ski region is essentially exactly what it sounds like, 3 valleys in a row, although there is a bit more nuance to how it's all set up. From east to west, the big resorts in the region include Courchevel, which is known for its incredibly upscale bona fides, Méribel, which is the largest and most centrally located of the bunch, and Val Thorens, which is essentially one huge above treeline bowl spanning multiple aspects and offering the highest base elevation of any ski resort in the European Alps. All 3 of these resorts are already huge in their own right. To put this into perspective, Méribel is already bigger from edge to edge than every single ski resort in North America. But a few smaller sectors also sit on the west side of the region, including Saint-Martin-de-Belleville, which serves lower elevation terrain near the commune of the same name, Les Menuires, which offers family-friendly slopes immediately below Val Thorens, and Orelle, which is effectively the Val Thorens backside and includes the highest lift-served point in the entire Les Trois-Vallées region. Across all 6 of these sectors, there is more than plenty of skiable terrain for all ability levels, although as with most European Alps resorts, below treeline terrain is a bit limited. Despite its massive and complex footprint, Les Trois-Vallées isn't a terrible destination for beginners, although lower-level visitors may want to consider the ski region for its individual resorts rather than the overall dominion. Easier green-rated pistes can be found across 4 of the 6 sectors, with the smaller Saint-Martin and Orelle being the exceptions. The best green trails are arguably found at Courchevel, which offers easy slopes across multiple lifts and elevations, whereas in other sectors, green trails are mostly confined to the lower mountain. For beginners, Les Trois-Vallées becomes a bit more complicated when trying to use easier terrain to travel between individual resort sectors. There are no green trails that link the resorts between one another, but from a practical standpoint, less experienced visitors probably won't be there to ski all 25,000 acres of terrain anyway. Les Trois-Vallées is a great destination for intermediates, and at this level, visitors should be able to take advantage of the vast majority of the resort. The region's blue trails span all but a handful of lift pods, with large sections of mid-mountain areas all but dominated by this level of terrain. In the case of Saint-Martin-de-Belleville, almost every single trail is an intermediate level blue piste. For those used to skiing and riding in North America, it's worth noting that the blue pistes in Les Trois-Vallées tend to be a bit on the easier side compared to many destinations in the Rockies and on the West Coast. But for those looking for a bit more of a challenge, Les Trois-Vallées is also an awesome choice for those who love advanced level groomed terrain. With the exception of some lower elevation sections of Courchevel, Méribel, and Saint-Martin, every part of the ski region is home to reasonably steep red pistes, which would likely be considered as doable for guests of advanced intermediate to true advanced proficiency. This difficulty level of terrain is more prevalent in high alpine areas than the previous levels we covered, but there are a few good below treeline cruisers in Courchevel and Méribel as well. While typically groomed every day, a handful of red pistes in the Dominion can see moguls build up, especially in the afternoon during busy times. As the largest interconnected ski region in the world, one would expect Les Trois-Vallées to have strong freestyle terrain, and in this respect, the Dominion generally delivers. There are 6 snowparks across the full footprint, with 2 at each of Val Thorens and Méribel, and 1 each at Courchevel and Les Menuires. Those looking for the best possible terrain park build need to head to Val Thorens' VT Park, which has massive jumps, rollers, a halfpipe, and even an airbag feature. Méribel's open park is also a must-hit for freestylers, with 2 halfpipes ranging in size from medium to extra large. The parks at Courchevel and Les Menuires are somewhat more tame, but they're still home to decently large features. Les Trois-Vallées' hardest level of slopes are designated with a black color. This type of terrain is not quite as widespread as blue and red pistes, but plenty of runs still exist throughout the massive footprint, especially in upper mountain areas. Normal black pistes are typically groomed, but they can get bumped up. But for those looking for the hardest on-piste challenges the region has to offer, freeride pistes, which are denoted by an orange boundary surrounding the black rating, are never groomed, and these runs are often supremely steep as well. Thrill seekers should make sure to check out the Grand Couloir at Courchevel, which brings the steepest gradient of any march trail in the region into definitive no-fall zone topography. The Couloir Tonnier, which extends off the same Saulier Ridge into Méribel, is a close second in terms of difficulty. It's also worth touching on the small selection of hike to pistes within the Les Trois-Vallées region. Located at the very top of Courchevel, the Freeride Lab has 2 marked pistes, one advanced red run and one expert black run. The area is left over from a lift that was removed several years ago and never replaced. This Freeride Lab can have some great hidden powder stashes if it hasn't snowed in the past few days, but for most visitors, the hike probably won't be worth it. If the 600 kilometers of marked terrain isn't enough for you, the Les Trois-Vallées region is also home to an incredible selection of off-piste terrain. This includes several sections of terrain in between the marked trails, especially in upper mountain areas, with some being fairly mellow, but others involving substantial obstacles, including rocks, cliffs, and unmarked chutes. There are also some absolutely ginormous sections of lift access off-piste outside the outer trails of Méribel, Val Thorens, Orelle, and Les Menuires, and if you're not careful, you can easily get lost in these areas and find yourself in the middle of nowhere. An even greater amount of off-piste terrain is accessible with a bit of hiking, and you can find some fantastic touring routes in the French Alps wilderness within close proximity to the resort. This all being said, even if you venture just out of the bounds of a close-by slope, the off-piste in Les Trois-Vallées is true backcountry terrain, and there is no maintenance for avalanches or other hazards, meaning you are on your own to assess the safety of the conditions. If you're planning to access this type of terrain, we strongly recommend you bring proper backcountry equipment, including a beacon, shovel, and probe, and if you're not familiar with the region, it's probably a good idea to hire a guide as well. So Les Trois-Vallées is a huge ski region with varied terrain, but no matter how big a ski area is, it's nothing without good snow. And despite significant variations in elevation and exposure, Les Trois-Vallées delivers quite well on this front for the European Alps. The snow totals in the lower areas of Courchevel, Méribel, and Les Menuires aren't all that impressive, but upper mountain areas average well over 200 inches, and the high elevation Val Thorens typically sees a very robust 250 inches, which is competitive with some areas of the North American Rockies. But even if Mother Nature doesn't deliver, Les Trois-Vallées generally maintains strong conditions thanks to snowmaking on over half of its terrain, primarily in mid and lower mountain areas. All of the Les Trois-Vallées resorts have bases of at least 1,300 meters, which is quite high for the French Alps, and unlike some competitors, the valley runs at Les Trois-Vallées have remained mostly open in recent years. As a result, Orelle and the Brie-les-Bains section of Méribel are the only parts of the ski region where lift downloading is regularly required for skiers and riders of all ability levels. However, some of the valley runs, especially those to Les Praz at Courchevel and Les Allues at Méribel, can get quite icy or bare throughout the season. But these strengths don't mean that the conditions are always enjoyable in the Les Trois-Vallées region. Due to the Dominion's high alpine biased nature, visibility tends to be quite difficult when storms roll through. This is a huge issue at Val Thorens, Orelle, and most of Les Menuires, which sit entirely above treeline and provide very few natural landmarks to aid with visibility. Even in flat light conditions, eyeing the snow surfaces in front of you can be extremely difficult. Courchevel, Méribel, and Saint-Martin do have some below treeline terrain to spend time in when visibility is low, but this type of terrain is limited. At least the most rudimentary of navigation is always possible, thanks to boundary poles that delineate the bounds of each marked piste, with the left and right poles having slightly different designs to help guests stay within the run rather than on the outside of it. Also somewhat helpful is that each piste has a system of numbered poles alongside it, which denotes how far one is from the bottom of said run. When it comes to getting around in general, the Les Trois-Vallées region was never going to be easy due to its massive layout. On the plus side, most of the individual sectors are reasonably straightforward to get around from an intra-resort standpoint, with the exception of Méribel, which does have a somewhat confusing base setup and indirect lift layout. In addition, resort signage is relatively straightforward and intuitive to understand, even for those who don't speak French. However, things get a whole lot more complicated if trying to navigate the Dominion as one comprehensive footprint. The major sectors have a bit of what we'd call a staircase setup, and when going from left to right on the trail map, navigating sectors often involves going up in elevation just as much as it does engaging in the simple act of transport. In fact, to get to any part of Val Thorens from Courchevel, guests will need to find their way to what's basically the highest elevation lift at Méribel to avoid taking a circuitous detour through Les Menuires first. Even getting between neighboring resort sectors can take quite a bit of time. With each individual resort already encompassing a huge footprint, it often takes 2 or 3 lifts to get to the nearest neighboring resort from any given base area. It's usually best to allot at least half an hour to get from one sector to the next over neighbor, and over an hour if you plan on traversing across more than one resort. But perhaps the most frustrating part of Les Trois Vallées setup is what happens if you end up at the wrong resort at the end of the day. The resorts may be closely connected by their lift networks, but the same is most certainly not the case for their road networks. If you end up at Val Thorens or Les Menuires after the lifts close and you need to get back to Courchevel or Méribel, expect to shell out up to €200 for a taxi ride that will take well over an hour. It may just make more sense to book a hotel in the base village you ended up stuck in rather than trying to get back to your resort of origin. The interconnected nature of Les Trois Vallées also has an impact on lift lines across the resort. While the Dominion's crowds aren't universally horrendous, certain popular transit routes can see massive queues during peak times. Some of the biggest culprits are the Platier Gondola at Méribel, which is used to get both to Val Thorens and the popular Mont Velon summit area, the old and underdesigned Chenu Gondola at Courchevel, which provides an important link from the Courchevel 1850 base to the Letania zone and parts of Méribel, and the relatively low-capacity Cime-Caron tram at Val Thorens, which provides access to the best advanced terrain at both Val Thorens and Orelle. However, any lift that sits along a direct route from one valley to another gets busy during peak times. If a lift is on a limb away from one of these transport routes, it's usually a lot quieter. When it comes to the lifts themselves, Les Trois Vallées enjoys a mostly modern setup. With the exception of a handful of lifts in the upper mountain areas at Courchevel and Orelle, plus a few primarily real estate access lifts in Les Menuires and Courchevel village, the entire Dominion is held down by high-speed lift service. And while there are some surface lifts, they are exceptionally rare compared to many other high-end Alps resorts. The footprint boasts a huge variety of unique lifts, from bubble chairs to enclosed gondolas to funitels to aerial trams, and it's often possible to make your way from the bottom to the top of a certain valley by sticking exclusively to enclosed lifts. Many of the Dominion's funitels and trams utilize a jig-back design which hurts capacity, but with tram cabins that can fit as many as 160 people at a time as of 2024, that carrying deficiency isn't as bad as one might think. And if the lifts aren't enough to impress, Les Trois Vallées is home to some decidedly incredible views. The uniquely extensive layout of the footprint, with seemingly unending networks of resort infrastructure, is already quite the sight to behold. But the region's upper mountain areas are home to stunning vistas of the surrounding mountain ranges. Val Thorens, Orelle, Méribel, and Les Menuires all have areas with photo-worthy views, and when it comes to Val Thorens in particular, the completely tree-devoid base village and white-painted chairlifts make for an unforgettable aesthetic. But we'd argue the real star of the show is Courchevel, which directly overlooks the Vanoise National Park. The sector's Col de Champ-Rosa zone in particular feels the most one with nature of the entire region. However, Courchevel is also by far the most moneyed resort of the Les Trois Vallées Dominion, with not just extremely high-end restaurants and stores, but also Gucci and Moncler branded lifts and gondola cabins. If you're looking for down-to-earth vibes, Courchevel is about as far from that as one can get. Places like Méribel and Les Menuires are a lot more down-to-earth. But no matter how fancy this specific resort, Les Trois Vallées is bolstered by a very competitive restaurant scene. Unless you are in the Col de Champ-Rosa area of Courchevel or the very top of Orelle, you are sure to be in close proximity to one or more dining facilities. These eateries range from basic cafeterias and sandwich shops to ultra-high-end Michelin-star restaurants. We'd argue that Courchevel has the highest-end dining setup, and outside the aforementioned Col de Champ-Rosa area, it feels like there's a restaurant around every corner. Méribel and Les Menuires offer the most down-to-earth eateries of the bunch, with more grab-and-go options than the others. It's worth noting that unlike many North American resorts, several dining facilities at Les Trois Vallées are available for sit-down restaurant service only, so you can't really go into every lodge at the mountain expecting a quick bite. At many of Les Trois Vallées resorts, the bar and restaurant action doesn't stop with lunch. The region is home to a competitive après scene, although the degree to which guests will find après does depend on the specific resort. To start partying before the slopes close, guests will want to find their way to one of the two Folie Douce locations at Val Thorens and Méribel. These venues get rowdy, even on weekdays, with live music and DJs through the afternoon until the sun goes down. Both resorts also have multiple other après venues dispersed across the ski slopes that are worth checking out, including Rond Point at Méribel and Bar 360 at Val Thorens. With this all being said, if you end up at one of these locations until close, Be careful, because you'll be skiing or riding back down to the base alongside a large group of people who aren't exactly sober. Courchevel and Les Menuires don't have quite as much of an après scene on the slopes, but the base villages do have a decent number of options that include live music. On the other hand, the smaller Saint-Martin and Orelle are not the places to be for an après vibe. Once fully off the slopes, guests will find a strong variety of bars and restaurants across the numerous Les Trois-Vallées base areas. Both Courchevel and Méribel have multiple base towns, while the others essentially have one each. For the most part, these towns offer a variety of restaurants ranging from casual to ultra luxury, although bases such as Courchevel 1850 are on the significantly fancier side, while those such as Les Menuires and Méribel's Brie-le-Bon lean a lot more casual. For night owls, Méribel, Val Thorens, and Les Menuires all have nightclubs that stay open well past midnight, and in some cases go as late as 5 in the morning. As the largest interconnected ski area in the world, getting to Les Trois-Vallées heavily depends on which resort you plan to stay at. In fact, the two furthest removed towns, Orelle and Courchevel, are nearly an hour and a half away from one another by road, and that's assuming clear conditions. For most international travelers, the best airport to fly into will be Geneva, Switzerland, although some more regional French cities have nearby airports as well. Les Trois-Vallées is not as connected to the cities by public transportation as some competing resorts, although some level of bus service does exist to each of the resorts. While direct bus service from the airports is not available, visitors can take a bus or train to the town of Moutier for a transfer to buses to any base town. However, these public transportation routes often involve multiple transfers even before the town of Moutier, and often take over 5 hours from Geneva. Many guests will find it easiest to rent a car or private shuttle, which, depending on the resort, takes closer to 2 or 2.5 hours from Geneva. But while getting to Les Trois-Vallées may not be the easiest thing in the world, you'll probably forgive this circumstance when taking a look at the wide variety of lodging options available. For those traveling on a budget, there are basic apartments in places like Brie-le-Bon, Saint-Martin-de-Belleville, and Orelle, offering more affordable access to the slopes. While no true shared room hostels exist in Les Trois-Vallées, you'll find the cheapest possible lodging options in small French communes about 15 to 20 minutes away from the bases. Mid-range accommodations are common in Méribel and Courchevel-Letania, with a mix of chalets and hotels that provide good comfort and value. Val Thorens has some mid-range accommodations as well, but they're generally a bit more upscale than Méribel and the smaller resorts down the Belleville Valley. At the highest end, Courchevel's on-site lodging options are just as expensive as one might expect, with 5-star hotels in Courchevel 1850 offering top-tier amenities such as fine dining, private spas, and concierge services. So for most people, Les Trois-Vallées is a bit unwieldy to depict as one comprehensive resort, but the Dominion is so unconscionably extensive that it's worth a visit for any skier or rider looking to knock one of the most unique ski resorts in the world off their bucket list. On top of that, each of Courchevel, Méribel, and Val Thorens are so well-rounded in their own right that they could easily be considered some of the best ski resorts in the world, even if they weren't interconnected with one another. But perhaps the best part about Les Trois-Vallées, especially for those coming from the United States, is its lift ticket price. Tickets for the full Les Trois-Vallées footprint, and yes, that's over 25,000 acres of terrain to explore, top out at just 79 euros, and the ticket prices for each of the individual resorts are even cheaper. With today's exchange rates, that's under 85 US dollars, an almost unthinkable value for those coming from across the pond. Les Trois-Vallées is also available for 7 consecutive days on the Epic Pass, but the full pass only, and unless you're skiing or riding in the United States at least one other time this winter, it's probably worth just getting lift tickets. Now let's go through how Les Trois-Vallées stacks up in our overall rankings, which are determined by the following 10 category mountain scoring. Since this region is so insanely big, and many of the individual resorts offer their own lift tickets, we'll be scoring Courchevel, Méribel, and the combinations of both Val Thorens, Orelle, and Les Menuires Saint-Martin as their own resorts, in addition to the Les Trois-Vallées region as a whole. Snow totals across the Les Trois-Vallées region vary overall, but guests can expect very consistent accumulation for the Alps as a whole, earning a 6 overall and at each of Courchevel, Méribel, and Les Menuires Saint-Martin, while bumping up to a 7 for the high elevation Val Thorens Orelle. The Les Trois-Vallées region is susceptible to snow droughts like all European Alps mountains, but it's about as snow-sure as it gets for this part of the continent, earning a 7 overall and at each of Courchevel, Méribel, and Val Thorens, while dropping down to a 6 for the lower elevation Les Menuires Saint-Martin duo. Les Trois-Vallées is the largest ski area in the world, measuring in at an astounding 25,780 acres from boundary piste to boundary piste, and potentially including more if you know what you're doing in the lift-served off-piste. But what's even crazier is some of the individual resorts are large enough to beat out the vast majority of competing destinations in their own right, with Méribel's 8,600 acre footprint earning it our highest score of 10 for size on its own, while Courchevel, Val Thorens, Orelle, and Les Menuires Saint-Martin all have footprints of over 5,600 acres, earning scores of 9 each. Les Trois-Vallées has plenty of terrain for all abilities across its entire footprint, with the only real weaknesses being somewhat limited below treeline terrain and less intense extreme terrain than a handful of competitors. Both the resort as a whole and Méribel get a 9 for terrain diversity, while the smaller but still comprehensive Courchevel, Val Thorens, and Les Menuires drop down to an 8, 7, and 6 respectively. Les Trois-Vallées doesn't have quite the same caliber of extreme freeride terrain as some Alps mountains, but there are still some formidable challenges. In both the region as a whole and Val Thorens get a 7 for challenge, while Courchevel and Méribel get bumped up to an 8 thanks to their respective couloir terrain, although Les Menuires Saint-Martin's mellower footprint drops that area down to a 5. Les Trois-Vallées has an excellent lift system, with surface lifts and slow chairs in only a handful of areas. Méribel's lifts stand out the most, earning that resort a 10 in this category, while the others still earn a very impressive score of 9. Les Trois-Vallées' most popular areas are not where you want to be during busy periods, and any lift route that's used to transit between valleys can become a choke point, but the region is so big that it's nearly always possible to find a place without a line. In the region as a whole, and Val Thorens Orelle get a 7 for crowd flow, while Courchevel and Méribel are bumped down to a 6 each, while the less busy Les Menuires Saint-Martin earned an 8 in this category. Les Trois-Vallées has a great variety of on-mountain facilities, although some of them are overly fancy for certain folks' tastes, and a handful of areas sit fairly far from the nearest lodge. The region gets an 8 for facilities across the board. Les Trois-Vallées' individual resorts aren't the worst in the world to get around, but the region as a whole could take a dissertation to explain due to its incredibly complex layout. The full region gets a score of just 2 in this category, while Méribel, Les Menuires Saint-Martin, Courchevel, and Val Thorens Orelle get scores of 4, 5, 6, and 7 respectively. And finally, mountain aesthetic. And well, it's a sight to behold the largest ski resort in the world, and the full region's one-of-a-kind setup earns it our highest score of 10 in this category. Courchevel, which borders a stunning national park, also gets this score, while Méribel and Val Thorens Orelle get 9s each, and the lower elevation Les Menuires gets an 8. These categories add up to an overall score of 77 for each of Courchevel, Méribel, and Val Thorens Orelle, a 70 for Les Menuires Saint-Martin, and a 75 for the full ski dominion. But wait a minute, how does the full Les Trois-Vallées ski footprint score lower than some of the individual resorts? Well, one could argue part of it is due to the fact that when a resort gets beyond a certain size, it just becomes too unwieldy for most people to consider as one comprehensive experience, and it's probably fair to say that for most people visiting Les Trois-Vallées, skiing or riding from Courchevel to Val Thorens and back won't be a common occurrence. But Les Trois-Vallées also kind of broke our rating scale, with the footprint size being over 3.5 times the threshold for our highest score of 10 for size, and the Dominion offering more than enough high alpine terrain for beginner to advanced visitors to warrant its high score in terrain diversity. But semantics aside, Les Trois-Vallées is probably the best European ski region we visited last year. Its footprint provides a level of continuous size, well-rounded terrain for all abilities, and comprehensive infrastructure that's really hard to come by elsewhere, not just in the region, but in the entire world. Add in a reliable snow footprint for Europe, and you end up with a must-hit destination for those who have the Alps on their radar. If you found this information helpful, be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our content. And special thanks to our Peak patrons. For more information on Les Trois-Vallées and over 100 ski destinations around the world, check out peakrankings.com. See you for the next one.